We're going to talk about conferences because conferences are an effective way to engage with students as they write papers and to help them improve not only the paper but to improve as a writer, because our goal is not to generate a good paper for freshman comp. Our goal is to help them learn to be competent writers so that they can write in all of their classes and in their profession, in any writing situation that they confront. So conferences are one-on-one interactions with students where we work with them individually on a particular piece of writing, usually in the drafting process, although it could come in the revision or the planning stage as well. It can be time-consuming, but the time we spend in conferencing usually proves to be a valuable investment with students. It also helps to build a rapport with students, that one-on-one interaction with them. I often feel like it is not until we begin drafting a paper that I really connect with students. That time that I spend one-on-one, talking to them, asking questions, engaging with them, really makes a difference in the rapport that I have with students. And it allows us to work with students on specific issues. And as many students as we have, we're likely to have that many issues. Some people will have perfect grammar, whereas other students' grammar will be a real challenge. Some students will have trouble developing their ideas or keeping a unifying theme running through the paper. So we can meet the students where they are and address specific needs for each student. Some of the best practices for conferencing is when students come from a conference, they should have, if you're bringing them to your office to meet and talk about a paper, they really should come with 2 copies of the paper, one for the instructor and one for them to hold. Or it's possible to look onto a draft together, although that makes it a little more difficult. The draft can be either on paper or electronic, but I don't recommend trying to look together at a draft on their phone. Students should have a pen. I tell my tutors this all the time. When students come in for conferences or tutoring sessions, they should always have a pen in their hand. This is an active endeavor for the student. It is not passive. The student should have a pen in their hand and be prepared to mark or annotate their paper as they go along. Sometimes that means I have to stop and say to the student, write that down. You won't remember it later. Let's go ahead and make a note of that thing, because I think sometimes it makes students uncomfortable to stop and ask their professor to wait on them while they're writing. And so encouraging them to go and being patient as they do it, encouraging them to go ahead and do that can be an important part of teaching them how to address revisions as they come across places where changes need to be made. It also should be a dialogue, not a monologue. You and the student should be interacting rather than the student simply listening to the professor say, you need to change this and you need to change that. The goal of this is not just to show them what to change. It's not to have them write the paper that you would have written had you gotten this assignment, but it's to get them to think about how to approach a writing situation and then how to think about what they're trying to say, want to say, how to develop their ideas, and so forth. So some suggestions are to have students read aloud or read the paper aloud to them. I do this in all of my conferences. I've found it very useful. Students often don't read their own writing, and what they see is when they do, they find a lot of their own mistakes. They hear sentences that are confusing or cluttered or don't really go anywhere. They see grammatical errors. They will often stop and say, that didn't make sense. Or at the end of a paragraph, I'll say, okay, how does that connect to your thesis? I don't know. Okay, let's talk about that. And then figure out how how to connect it back to your thesis. Or they'll say, well, it connects this way, but you didn't say that in the paper. Oh, okay. So that active reading, slowing down, there's research that shows that reading aloud really does slow down our reading process and helps us to see things that we might not otherwise see if we're reading silently. And they also hear the sound of their words. Sometimes, though, I will find students will read a sentence that has a clear error in it, and I'll say, did you hear that? Can you tell what's wrong with that sentence? And they can't. So that gives me an opportunity to teach them subject-verb agreement or some other, maybe grammatical, maybe developmental development in the essay lesson. And then when we come across it again, the same error again, I can say, wait a minute, let's stop there. And now read that again. Do you see? And eventually they will start to see it because you have introduced them to the idea that that is an error pattern in their writing, and they'll see it and be able to correct it themselves. So asking questions can be a very good way of helping them develop as we look for like macro issues in their paper and not just the grammatical errors, but asking them questions about their paper. What are you trying to say here? There are times when students will say, I don't know how to say that. And so what are you trying to say? And I will just write as they dictate. And then I'll show them, you do know what you're trying to say. You just got hung up on the writing part of it. So that can be really helpful. But use this time to reinforce your goals for the essay and for the class. Use it as a teachable opportunity. And it's also a good opportunity to be a cheerleader, to encourage them, to point out what they did well, and give them a little bit of confidence as they move through the writing process. We do need to acknowledge that conferencing can be time consuming. So one option, this is the most time consuming option, is to schedule appointments during the week with every one of your students and have them come in to your office and work through the paper with you. Usually 15 minutes is a good time to spend with each student, but you could see how that could become very time consuming. So there's also the option of scheduling class time as work days, workshop days, where you can move through the room and interact with each student, 3 or 4 students in a given class. Some students will need more help than others. So if you set aside a week that would be a work week for them to work on their paper, they can interact with each other, asking one another questions, asking one another to read passages, and they can also have access to you and your assistants. Another way is to set up conference times outside of class with students who seem to have a particular need. So maybe not meeting with every student for every paper, but meeting with individual students who need that encouragement, assistance, a little more training in how to write effectively. But keep in mind, and this is the ultimate goal of a freshman composition class, the goal is not to make a paper good. We don't want to make a good paper. We want to make a good writer. We're not teaching them how to write this particular essay. We're teaching them how to work through the process and improve as a writer so that they can be successful writers in all of their writing situations. And that sometimes is the real challenge of it, because if we could just edit their paper for them, hand it back, say, make these changes, good paper, you made an A, you're a great writer, then our job would be easy. And since that's not the case, we really are trying to help them develop processes that can be effective for them through the whole writing process in any writing situation.